So we, of course, we're indigenous to this land in the way that a plant is indigenous to a place. It's our natural habitat. But when we speak politically for the Jewish people to make the claim that we're indigenous to this land in a political sense is a much more complicated conversation. Over the years, their ideas. They're ideas that began at the Vision Movement and have kind of found their way to the Hasbara industry and a lot of, pro-Israel social media influencers who don't fully understand these ideas. It's a problem. Like the idea of Jewish indigeneity, the idea of saying the idea of saying the Jewish people are indigenous to this land is an idea that we hear a lot now from people in the pro-Israel world, but I don't think most of them understand what they're talking about. I don't think most of them understand what that means. We hear a lot also about Jewish decolonization. It's another idea that really came from the Vision Movement, this idea of applying post-colonial theory and post-colonial studies to the situation and identity of the Jewish people. So when people talk about Jews being indigenous to this land, right, there are different ways to understand indigeneity. You can understand indigeneity in the way that a plant is indigenous to a place. In that way, for sure, 100%, no question, the Jewish people are indigenous to the land of Israel. This is our natural habitat. Right? The land of Israel is the natural habitat of the people of Israel. It's our soulmate, which is, by the way, different from the relationship of a lot of other indigenous peoples in their land. I'd say that most peoples in the world relate to their land as like a parent, motherland, fatherland, right? That's not our relationship to our land. We have a very unique relationship to our land. We relate to our land as a spouse. It's different, right? And it's hard for other people to understand. It's a very different type of relationship. It's our soulmate, right? And we've always regarded this land as our soulmate. Just like we regard the Torah as our soulmate, right? There's this spiritual organism called Knesset Yisrael, according to the ancient pre-colonial Hebrew ideological paradigm, what we'll call emunah, right? The way our ancestors saw the world, the way our ancestors experienced the world before the Romans destroyed our civilization. There was a way to understand reality. And part of that was understanding us, our identity, as this spiritual organism called Knesset Yisrael that shines into this world through millions of people in space and time called Jews, and the land of Israel and the Torah. That all of three things, the people of Israel, the land of Israel, the Torah of Israel, are unique expressions of this one soul. That's the way our ancestors understood our identity, right? And our relationship to our land and to the Torah. Therefore, living according to the Torah is living our true selves, living our true identity, expressing our true identity. Living in our land is the healthiest thing we can do. So we, of course, we're indigenous to this land in the way that a plant is indigenous to a place. It's our natural habitat. But when we speak politically about what it means to be indigenous or what it means to show up for indigenous peoples, fight for the rights of indigenous peoples, and fight against injustices imposed on them, it's a totally different understanding of what indigeneity means. It's all about a relationship to colonialism and a colonial process. And for the Jewish people to make the claim that we're indigenous to this land in a political sense is a much more complicated conversation. I would still argue that we are, but it's not because we're indigenous the way a plant is. And you can't really say that the Jews are an indigenous people in a political sense today, and that there's something we're resisting that's unjust, that people should support us and side with us unless you understand the true nature of the US-Israel relationship and the way in which we're victims of it. If somebody doesn't understand the extent to which Israel is a victim of the US empire today, it's very hard to make the argument that we are indigenous right now in the political sense. Same thing when we talk about decolonization. I often hear pro-Israel social media influencers, especially the younger generation, use terminology like decolonization improperly, like saying things like we decolonized our land in 1948. Israel decolonized our land. The Jewish people decolonized our land in 1948. It's not true. It's not what happened. We did not decolonize anything in 1948. We can say that we liberated our land from British rule in 1948, which we did, specifically the Lehi, the Stern Group. They fought a roughly decade-long anti-colonial struggle against British rule. At a certain point in 1944, the Etzel joined them, and that increased the pressure on the British Empire. But they liberated Palestine from British rule in 1948, and then the Zionist movement declared a state, and the way in which they declared that state was essentially putting Jewish decorations on a British colonial system. We did not dismantle the colonial structures in this land. We merely put Jewish labels on them. We did not decolonize our identity. We did not even begin to address the ways in which we suffer from layers and layers and layers of colonization. We didn't try to heal. We didn't try to address what we can call a galut mentality, like the psychological impact of several centuries of deep traumatic persecution. We didn't try to heal from that. We didn't have a national conversation about the type of society we're trying to create. And we certainly didn't take meaningful steps to prevent more powerful nations from asserting soft control over us, economic control over us, control over our policies, control over our military, etc. Every nation that achieves liberation from foreign rule and puts up a flag and declares independence has to also protect itself from neo-imperialism. The new ways, not boots on the ground, but the new ways that the imperial powers try to control smaller and weaker states. We didn't do any of that. We didn't decolonize anything in 1948, but we do need to decolonize today. We do need to dismantle the colonial structures in this land. We do need to stop behaving like colonizers, right? The core anti-Israel accusation is that we're a bunch of colonizers. And the pro-Israel response to that is often, how could we be colonizers? We're from this land. We're indigenous like a plant. And so you can't call us a colonizer. Listen, I'm a Kohen. I'm from the tribe of Levi. I'm a son of Israel. It's a betrayal of my identity to eat a pig, but I could eat one. And it's a betrayal of Israel's identity to behave like a colonizer in a land that we're native to, but we could do it. And we do it. We behave like a colonizer. We use colonial methodology, colonial structures, and we even sometimes display a colonial mentality in regard to our regional enemies, especially the Palestinians. And we need to decolonize. And when we talk about Jews being indigenous to the land, it's not an argument for why we're right. It's an identity we need to internalize. We should be trying to indigenize or re-indigenize back into this region. Not just say we're indigenous and go on trying to be a liberal Western state in West Asia, an outpost of Western power, right? A Rhodesia, but calling ourselves indigenous. We need to actually internalize that identity and indigenize and decolonize and become what we came back to life to be.